Our first speaker tonight is Brad Hambrick. Brad is the pastor and counselor in Durham, North Carolina. He earned his Master of Divinity degree with a counseling emphasis and a doctorate from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. Through many years of his ministry, his core convictions have guided his approach to counseling. These are the necessity of the gospel, the centrality of the local church, the primacy and finality of Scripture, and a balanced perspective on how the gospel speaks in both sin and suffering. Brad is a widely published author whose books include Making Sense of Forgiveness and Navigating Destructive Relationships. He also served as the editor to Becoming a Church That Cares Well for the Abused, which you can pick up a copy of in the back if you like. When Brad isn't writing, he enjoys cooking, coaching baseball, and taking walks with his corgi named Rookie, who we have a picture of here. Tonight, Brad will be speaking to us about the pastoral response to abuse. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Brad Hambrick.
The blame for me there. Can you hear me now? All right. So it is good to get to be with you. It has been a wonderful day. We've had several meetings kind of pre-Haven related. And this ministry, all that it is and stands for, has been a delight to get to know. I just want to say thank you for the courage to come and address a subject that it would be much easier to ignore, and many of us would like to think doesn't exist. But you've had the courage to come and participate in this, and so thank you. And also thank you for inviting myself and Darby to get to be a part of this event. Now, when you came in, you should have received a handout that looks something like this. If you did not, I would encourage you to if we can pass those out, this whole thing will make a lot more sense if you see that. But as you get ready to look at it, then what we're going to do is we're going to work from the bottom up and from left to right. But I want to caution us against looking at this as a paint by numbers kind of chart. It is a flow chart. I am somewhat allergic to flow charts. And so they are good for teaching us principles. They can serve as a map. If we start to treat them as a protocol, they can make us artificially rigid and we can be a bit distracted by them. Now, I will say, as we walk through this evening, I'm going to be primarily talking to pastors and church leaders. And to kind of give the significance of that, I would say it this way. Guidance for the church is not a script for the victim. And so as we walk through this, these are the priorities for pastors and church leaders when someone entrusts us with their story. This is meant to give us guidance. This isn't for us to hand somebody and go, these are the rules for you to follow as you tell us your story. See, I went to a thing, and this is what you're supposed to do. This is the way and the timing in which we do that. That would be rude. I want, when I go to my doctor, I want them to know the principles and priorities of good care. I also want them checking my vital signs as we're going along. And if we're going to have surgery, I want them to make sure that I'm ready to receive that surgery. They need to have their priorities. They need to move at the pace of, in that case, their patient. And so as churches, we need to have that same kind of priority. So as we do this, I remember when our children were little and you would go to the zoo, like you would ride the train around the zoo and you would see where the animals were and they would get a feel for the entire venue. And then from there, you would start to kind of plan out when you were going to see the monkeys and the bears and the lions. And this is our attempt to kind of overview a wise and good pastoral response. And so if we start there at the bottom, we're going to talk about receiving the initial disclosure. Now, right now I'm talking to you as the person receiving that disclosure. If I could talk about this bottom row and just summarize it rather simply, it's your goal to take that precious friend who has come to you and to help them feel like a person to be heard instead of a liability to be managed. That at that point where somebody shares something with you and your rut-row reflex goes off. You're like, I have responsibilities. This is important. There's something that I need to do. My heart rate starts to speed up. My pupils get a little bit dilated. I want to make sure I do the right thing. It is so easy for us to go into protocol mindset. And all of a sudden, this person feels like they are on a conveyor belt with obligations and tasks that need to be done, and they lose a lot of their personhood. I want what we do here to allow us to know those ministry priorities well enough that that person in front of us never ceases to feel like a person to be heard, as if their story is precious to be received and not a liability to be managed. And so we start here with just some simple do's and don'ts. And so this first one here, like if we get this one right, we get the vast majority of it right. Do believe, support, and connect the victim with appropriate professionals. The most important thing you can do, that reflex of the moment of have I done a good thing or a bad thing by coming to you and talking to you, do you believe me? For some of us, we're like, does that mean I automatically go into like vigilante justice and just, no, it means you listen with the benefit of the doubt. And that, now again, we come here and there's some aspect that we're going to primarily talk here with an eye towards an adult who is coming to us. I'm from Kentucky. I like to keep things relatively simple. It's the way my folks operate. My people. And so if I could give you a little rhyming phrase, if it's a minor, report. If it's an adult, support. And minor here, meaning someone not capable of self-care. So the same principles apply to an elderly person who has lost the capacity for self-care, someone with a disability who's incapable of self-care. But a child can't decide to go get their own job. They don't have their own transportation. They can't secure their own home. The types of things that they might be able to do to get themselves out of an abusive or neglectful situation, they don't have the capacity for that. And that's why CPS exists. They can intervene with a jurisdiction we don't have. And again, jurisdiction is an important word here. Like there's certain things that even if as church members we're right, like let's say we know of a home where a child is being abused and we go into that home and we take that child from the home and we pull them away. What's that called? Kidnapping. Okay, and we get in trouble for that. We don't have the jurisdiction, even if we're right, to do that. And again, it's not that what CPS does, it's not their goal to take children from homes. But when that is needed, we don't have the jurisdiction to do that. That's a jurisdiction that in a Romans 13 Partners for Justice way that is given to CPS. But as we're believing, if we have an adult, we support them because they're the ones that are going to make the choices. One of the things that we'll say time and again, we will not have to live with the consequences of the choices that are made. And so the person who's living with the consequences should be the one who's making those choices. And so we do believe, support, connect. Don't respond with fear or apprehension because of the weight of the disclosure. There's a passage of Scripture, Hebrews 4, 14 to 16, that I love, but I don't think as a young Christian I understood what the author of Hebrews was trying to get at. And so if you know that passage, it says we have a great high priest that went through all the kinds of sufferings that we go through so that we can come to him with confidence as we approach the throne of grace. And when I heard that phrase, with confidence, my assumption had always been there was nothing too big to ask of God. I thought that with confidence was an indicator of God's omnipotence, his all-powerfulness. And theologically, I wouldn't be wrong. God is all-powerful. I just don't think that was the author of Hebrews' point. Again, I'll appeal to a point of lived experience. Think of that time when you had some type of burden or secret, and you mustered up the courage to talk to a friend. And usually as we do that, if this is a significant disclosure, somehow we become preoccupied with our feet. And we are looking down the whole time. It's kind of that posture of shame. And you get to that point where you've said what it is that you have to say. And you look up. And as soon as you catch eye contact, you immediately determine whether you have done something good or whether you're afraid you've made the biggest mistake you've made in a very long time. Because if you catch those eyes and they look bewildered, frustrated, scared, condemning, you think, oh no, what did I do? If you catch those eyes and they are warm and compassionate and caring, there is this deep sigh of relief. And when the author of Hebrews is setting up that passage, he says that we have a high priest who suffered in all the ways that we have suffered, so that we can approach the throne of grace with confidence that when we bring our burden to our Savior, we never have to worry about looking up from prayer and wondering, does he get it? Well, in our role as pastors and church leaders, I think we often miss how we get to be the ambassador of God's eyes. So often when we think about being an ambassador of God, we just think being an ambassador of his voice, saying his kinds of words to people, teaching. That in these kinds of moments of receiving a disclosure, I want to be an ambassador of God's eyes. You are welcome, you are known, you are cared for, you are believed, you are supported. And that's going to be communicated from that moment that they look up and wonder, was this a good idea or a bad idea? And so do understand that their disclosure may be fragmented, emotional, and nonlinear. When somebody is sharing a story of abuse, it is normal to be quite disrupted when you talk about it. In many of our Christian circles, we develop a mistrust for emotion. If we see intense emotion, we think that it somehow means this is less reliable. Just this past week, got a phone call from our son, unexpected time, 17-year-old senior in high school. When he called, you could tell there was adrenaline pumping through his veins. He had just hit a deer. We're still trying to figure that out. The presence of emotion, his ability to gather his thoughts, to answer basic questions. Where are you? What road? How far from the high school were you? The presence of emotion did not make his testimony less reliable. It actually made it more, it fit. He's like, yeah, I hit a deer, messed my truck up bad. The flatness and flippantness of that would have made it less reliable, not more. don't believe that you must determine and decipher what happened. In the early stages of receiving a disclosure, you're not going to know. I'm not going to know. When we feel like we have to have certainty before we do something, that starts to put a lot of delay and stall into care. The more we delay and stall in our care, the more suspicion and pullback that emerges in our friend. When they start to get suspicious and pull back from us, we start to get suspicious and pull back from them. And all of a sudden, this cycle of mistrust emerges because we want it to be certain. To hear somebody, to receive them with the benefit of the doubt, to begin to connect them with good resources, it isn't to condemn anybody else. Even if you need to call CPS because there's a child that you have reasonable suspicion of abuse, that is not pressing charges on somebody. That's just beginning a process of care. Now, if you want to know more about this, I think I saw a copy out there, the Church Cares book that Darby and I were a part of. That book is all about the first aid, triage level, initial receiving. So if you want to take what we did in a few minutes and do it in a deeper dive, I would recommend that to you. And so now we move to this middle section of our document. I didn't do a good job of advancing my slides. There we go. Now we're on rows 2 and 3. And this is where initially the person who's going to come to us is the victim. And we want to move through some do's and don'ts when we're receiving that, when that full story is still coming to light from the victim. And then we'll talk about if there's legal implications and the accused. And so for the victim, do listen patiently. That there's a time zone difference that exists here. What our friend is sharing with us, that is new news to us. We have no context for it. We're still trying to catch up on the story. This is old news for them. And so on top of kind of that internal disruption that is there, it's very easy to assume we know the people and the times and the places, and we're trying to catch up. And so sometimes when we feel like we're behind, we can become defensive or impatient. And so listening patience, our patience is a form of care. Don't assume the first story is the full story. You know, when you sit down and they finish talking and they take that big sigh and now you feel like it's your turn to start talking, that doesn't mean you know everything you need to know. Often that's everything they felt like they could trust us with in that first moment of desperation. Or that is everything that was relevant based upon the prompting event that created this conversation. It may be everything that they think we need to know for the type of care that they need in that moment. You know, anytime we're walking into a crisis in the early stages, there's something I say quite frequently, it's annoying. We don't know what we know. Like what we have is an incomplete story, and we need to have the humility that comes with recognizing that. Now, in the early stages, we want to put a care team of some type around this person. That is the kind of ministry that Haven is here to help and equip. There's a link and an article there that I give you on the handout. When I say level 3 care team, you know, I kind of give 3 levels there. Level one is what most of us think of when we say care team. Somebody had a parent pass away, they just had a baby, there's a meal train, and as long as you don't miss your spot on the time that you're supposed to do something, it's great. Most of the information that is being cared for is largely already public information. Then you can have a crisis care team. That's where the information isn't public. It's a bit more acute need. There's more privacy needed. Level 3 is a crisis care team with resistance. You have multiple people involved in the sphere of care, and one or more of them is not excited for the church to be a part of it. There's different guiding principles that needs to be there, and that's what in that blog series that became an article in the Journal of Biblical Counseling, you can see that information there. Now, when I say if and when needed, again, one of our guiding principles, we move at the pace of the victim. A counseling mentor and kind of hero of mine was a gentleman named David Pallison. When he looked at Psalm 23, one of the observations I can remember him making is that we have a good shepherd who moves at the pace of his sheep. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. If I'm the shepherd and I am taking sheep through a place that merits the name, the valley of the shadow of death, I am skedaddling those little sheepies through there. Here, let's go, let's go. We have a shepherd who the verb is walk. That is a patient and majestic verb. We are to mirror that. We move at the pace of the sheep. And so don't be defensive about double bind request. Now, what do I mean by double bind? It's a two-part request where part one and part two don't get along. And so all of us this time of year, we're like, I want to lose weight and I still want to eat sweets. That's a double bind. I want to save money and still buy whatever I want. That's a double bind. One spouse may say to the other, we need to work harder to pay off debt and I want to spend more time with you. There's nothing wrong with either request. They're just not both possible. Sometimes a victim will come to us and say something like, will you address my husband but not tell them I came and talked to you? Well, that's a double bind. We can't do both parts of that. There's no reason for us to be defensive. We can patiently explain options. I'm not going to do anything until you're ready. I want to understand enough that I could speak into this responsibly well. If you're hesitant, we'll go at your pace. But in those kind of situations where they haven't thought through what they're asking, oftentimes it took every bit of the courage that they had just to start the conversation. Sometimes they didn't even mean to start the conversation, just precipitating events necessitated it. To get upset because you gave me an impossible request is really self-centered on our behalf. We should be more mature than that. These next two kind of go together. Do restore voice. Don't usurp personal agency. One of the factors of abuse is it robs us of our sense of voice. A sense that my words matter. That no means no. That stop means stop. That saying quit will do any good. That I'm scared will get a response of compassion. I begin to live as if my voice doesn't matter. And agency is the belief that my choices can make a difference. This is one where I've learned a great deal from my friends who are social workers. when social workers see well-intended church leaders and they get frustrated, it's usually because we come in and we start to do for the victim in a way that we become that benevolent, oversized role. Again, we're not the one who's going to live with the consequences of these choices. And so we can help you weigh them. We can help increase the number of choices that you have. We can give greater confidence in that you've thought these things through well, but we don't replace your voice there. That if somebody's in danger, we want to help them create a safety plan. Again, at this link there, you can find a sample safety plan. This is the kind of thing that if you are not sure about that, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And there's somebody there 24/7 that you just say, hey, I'm here with my friend. And my friend has shared with me these kinds of things. We're trying to think through how to make sure they're safe. We'd love your help with that. And then at that point, you just help your friend make sure that they shared the things with this person that they shared with you. You don't have to have all of the answers to be a good support, a good friend, a good pastor. Don't fear disruption of the family more than you pursue safety. This is often a hard one for us in church circles. When we've got something, if the disruption is in a family or in a marriage, the entity takes priority over the individual in a way that when Jesus said, there's flock responsibilities and sheep responsibilities, that when you have a sheep that is in danger, you don't prioritize the 99 over the one. It was actually the other way around in his economy. If we encourage somebody to go back into a violent home, we're not saving a marriage. That doesn't keep a family together. That delays and compounds the damage that is being done. And so do offer to connect the victim with counseling. Again, their choice on what they choose to participate in. We're not telling them what they have to do. You may notice this point here's a little bit repetitive. Haven't you already said that? Yes. Yes, I have. Because your friend is going to be overwhelmed. And the level of overwhelm they feel, like at those times in your life when you have felt scared to death. Is your memory working best then? Your level of retention? Patient repetition is a form of love. Now you see these signs. And you're looking at that, and there's a bent arrow and an or and a straight arrow and a don't sign. And so what we're saying here is that if legal jurisdictions are relevant, CPS because a child's in danger, law enforcement because the action taking place is illegal, HR because this is a abusive work environment that needs to go through those channels, we go there next. There are forms of abuse that are not illegal, that don't have that jurisdiction. And so kind of if I'm placing our scriptural references here, we're saying for those things that are illegal, those come under a Romans 13 jurisdiction, our partners for justice. That God did not give the civil authorities the sword for no reason. There's things they can do, consequences that they can levy that we cannot. They are our partners for justice is the language of Scripture. That's for things that are illegal. Matthew 18, just as one representative passage, those are things that are immoral. If things are immoral and illegal, I'm going to suggest that we let Romans 13 take the lead. That we're going to confound an investigation if we start doing church things first and we interrupt the opportunity for there to be justice. And so, if legal jurisdictions are relevant, don't go to the abuser before the authorities if safety or criminality is involved. And I'm going to come back to a passage on that here in just a moment. Do expect delays in the church processes when other jurisdictions get involved. If other jurisdiction gets involved and somebody has to get an attorney and they're going to say, don't talk to the church, whatever you say there can be subpoenaed, and they're going to start pleading the fifth with us. And yes, those things are going to happen. Now, some of us, we're like, now, wait a second. What about 1 Corinthians 13, where it says one believer is not supposed to take another believer to court? How does that play with Romans 13? Well, this is one where I think there is enough of a Christian DNA in the way that our founding fathers set up our government that we hear echoes of both passages in the way that our legal system works. I think 1 Corinthians 6, that's about civil lawsuits. That if my neighbor cuts down a tree that was on our line and it was more on my side of the property line and we go to the same church and I'm going to take them to court because that was my favorite tree, Paul says, don't embarrass the church over that. You ought to be able to handle that between yourselves. That's a civil matter. No DA's ever going to pick that up. They don't do property line stuff. And then Romans 13 is about criminal law, where a DA would say that is our jurisdiction. And so this kind of last piece here, do view your Romans 13 partners as friends in pursuing safety and justice. Like, as we monitor our internal equilibrium, that one's a big deal. If we're hesitant there, then our willingness to participate with these other friends is going to be compromised. Now, I'm going to need you all to listen a little faster. That's blame shifting, and it's wrong, and I shouldn't do that. But we're going to pick up our pace here a little bit. When it comes to the accused, don't confront the accused before the victim is ready. Now, if other people are in safety danger, that's where, as we are making an appeal to our friend, we're saying, hey, your willingness to cooperate, usually other authorities are going to be involved here, are really important. Not just for your safety, but for the safety of others. Do begin documenting responses to early questions. I give you a resource there for a well-structured church discipline process. Things will get murky and messy in the weeks ahead. You remembering who said what, when, and they go, I already told you that from the very beginning. And they didn't tell you that until last week when you've been a part of this process for 3 months. If you don't have an organized way of documenting things, it's going to be a whole lot easier for manipulation to interrupt the process. Don't be blind to your relational biases. We all have them. I put James 2 here, where, there James is saying, hey, you got the bias that comes when you see somebody and they're really well off and you want to be liked by them more than, well, those same kind of biases, that same principle would apply when I know this person really well. And my instinct in this moment is to go, I just know they would never, or they couldn't. I don't know that. I believe that. I believe that based on relationship. That's interpretation. That's not fact. when I begin to treat my interpretations as if they are facts, I'm giving them a weight they don't deserve. Do expect conflicting narratives wrapped around the same general facts. If you've been in these situations, you know when you start to have these conversations, it's like, I can create 7 facts that they both agree that these things happened. But when they tell me the story of those 7 facts, it's hard to believe they were in the same place at the same time. That's normal in these situations. Don't be surprised by it. Don't be a conduit of information. Passing information back and forth between the two. We can support, we can protect, but when we become the conduit of messages, you're in a grapevine game there. Creating a context where if they don't feel safe talking with one another, we'll talk about more of this tomorrow. How do we support and protect without our conveying of information becoming a confounding variable? Do create a level 3 care team. The person who's accused needs care also. We want to afford them the same choice if and when needed. We want to honor their voice and their agency. But resistance on the part of one person should not result in neglect of the other person. This is where a fairness doctrine can get weird. And it's like, well, if the person who's accused won't let us care for them, then it's really unfair if we rally around this person. Why? This person said yes, this person said no. We are honoring the wishes of both. I can't believe you're doing all of this for my spouse and you're not doing anything for me. We offered then, we offer now. The fact that you're playing like weird over something that we ask you about, that actually gives more credence to what they're saying. This is a reason of suspicion, but we will absolutely care for you. We're not playing games. I never said that. Oh, we wrote it down. Like, you can't play checkers with somebody who's playing chess. That's where these things matter. Oops, keep up with the slides. Don't equate spiritual language or sad emotions with repentance. Darby's going to take care of explaining all of that for us tomorrow. You got that, right? There we go. So when marital and family decisions are being made, we're at the spot where through this kind of process, information is gathered and now decisions are being made. Don't make choices for the victim. Again, their voice, their agency, we help them explore, we help them clarify, we help them identify options, we help them weigh options. They make choices. Do prioritize the most vulnerable throughout the process. Don't mistake safety decisions for unbiblical decisions. Like if you look at Matthew 7, 1 through 6, verse 6 is either connected with verses 1 through 5, or it's the most ADD squirrel verse in all of the New Testament. Because you got this whole thing about take the log out of your eye before you take the speck out of somebody else's. Right before that, judge not lest you be judged. Then you got this thing about dogs and pigs. And then you go to ask, seek, knock. You go into something on prayer. If you look at it, there's this progression. Hey, judge not lest you be judged. If somebody's just being weird on Twitter, that doesn't affect you that much. Let those things go. And then the relationship gets a little bit closer and the offense gets a little bit greater. It can't just be ignored. Well, if it's like that, take the log out of your eye before you take the speck out of somebody else's eye. Model the response from grace that you want from them, from you. And if you don't, then Jesus kind of says that's hypocritical. And then it's as if somebody raised their hand and said, Jesus, you know, you're my favorite teacher and I listen to all your podcasts. And is that all we can do? Because I got some situations that are really bad. And he uses two metaphors. One is a dog, which is not like Rookie. That's the sweet little corgi you saw just a moment ago. In Jerusalem, there were wild dogs. And if you tried to feed them like I would, if I see something with a wet nose, I want to feed it all the time. If you've got a wild dog, it doesn't know where the sandwich ends and the hand begins. It's going to turn and attack you. It says, if that's what's happening to your gracious response, don't keep doing that. It says, with pigs. I mean, I grew up on a farm. Pigs just kind of waller on stuff. If you give them pearls, they're just going to wallow around in the mud with it. I mean, back to Matthew Henry. This isn't some kind of modern abuse awareness era thing. He was like, Jesus is giving this warning to show the preciousness of his children and that they need not needlessly put themselves in harm's way. Help the victim think long term. They're scared. I mean, we've got a family reunion coming up next week. There's Thanksgiving in a month. And all of a sudden, these variables that feel very pressing, and you go, wait a second, in light of what we're talking about, is that really the most pressing thing? Again, I can't make the choices for you. I can help you elongate the view that you have, that you're looking at. Don't have a predetermined outcome. I mean, tomorrow we'll look at the fact that not all of Jesus' relationships were reconciled. Jesus walked away from a lot of people. Do provide support for your care team members. Like we talked about creating a care team and those who are around them. If you don't support the people who are supporting the victim, particularly if you're a pastor and you're kind of trying to rally people from your church to be a part of this, if you're not supporting the people on that care team, that's where they get burnt out and they abandon this person. And then your friend feels like they were abandoned by the church. Don't rush the decision-making process. Again, this is where the victim's timetable and the church's timetable are not always aligned. Is that frustrating for us as church leaders? Sure. Is that part of what we need to deal with and move at the pace of the sheep? Yes. So for the abuser, again, don't be a conduit of information. Do emphasize personal character over marital and family outcomes. They're going to push you on just getting the family back together. Because isn't that the right thing? Isn't that what Jesus would want? I think Jesus is much more concerned about your heart. And if the things that we have come to know over that earlier time of getting information are true, if this is your forefront concern, then as a shepherd over your soul, I want to issue a warning. Don't mistake supporting the victim for, is the church really saying? Is the church really saying that they're okay with this just being a divorce over this kind of situation? No, the church is saying we want you to take your sin seriously. We want you to take your sin more seriously than you take offense at your spouse's pursuit of safety. That's what we're saying. And if you can't do that, then we're saying a safety level concern is merited. So do call for patience, cooperation, and honesty with the legal and therapeutic process. Main thing we're going to ask is you cooperate with everybody involved. If somehow attorneys get involved and they start pleading the fifth, that may be permissible in the court of law. That tells us you've got something to hide. And we're going to approach this situation that if you cannot be completely forthcoming, If part of this has to do with financial abuse and manipulation, and you won't be transparent with records, and you're saying this is your privacy, that is perfectly your right. We can't make you not do that. The fact that you feel like you need to do that, we're going to tell you is a real reason for concern. Don't allow triangulation or team building to go unfronted. Triangulation, just when you get compliments to you that aren't really involved in change or cooperation in the process, like, I really appreciate how you hear me and you listen, and the other people involved in this don't. And they're trying to form an alliance. You're like, wait, this isn't part of what we're doing. Why are you giving me compliments on this? So don't allow that to go unaddressed. Do sympathize with the grief and fatigue in the process and change. Like, what they're going through is hard. Like that, there isn't an absence of compassion from us. This time of strain, if there is separation from family, if there are consequences, even if it is the consequences of your own sin, we can be compassionate towards that without compromising the other things that we've said. So closing thoughts here. This is not a neat journey, even with a flow chart. If you get into this, it's going to feel disorienting and frustrating. This is tiring work, and it will be criticized. There's no way you're going to do this work and not have people who get upset with you. Lots of people are going to have varying opinions about what's going on based on the snippets of information that they have. You are sharing that burden with your friend who knew this is why they didn't want to talk, because they knew this was going to happen. Our role is to accurately represent God's primary concern for this individual at this point in their journey. And so, our identity in this, if I were going to give you one, it's ambassador. I want to be an ambassador of God's heart to this person in this situation, at this moment that I get to be a part of their life. I don't want to be so distracted by where I would like this to go that, like, I'm with you here and we're looking to the next step, and there's a lot of variables that determine where we go from there. Again, it's tiring. It can be frustrating. But if we're not faithful, then our friend goes through this alone. And so I think what we're about to have is Carl's going to come up and transition us to the break. And then Darby's going to look more into coming alongside the victim in this process. I've tried to outline a process. She's going to help us see how we prioritize care for the victim in that. So thank you.